Hello everyone, this is Chandana Surapaneni, Assistant Professor of English, Teresian College, and this video will give you a preliminary exposure to some meaningful aspects and interpretations of the Indo-American Kashmiri poet Agha Shahid Ali's poem, The Country Without a Post Office, which was published in a collection with the same title in the year 1997. So, what are we waiting for? Grab a notebook and a pen if you have to, as I attempt to bring to you some ways of looking at Shahid Ali's poetry, which is a marvelous achievement and has a universal appeal, according to the post colonial theorist Edward Said. Agha Shahid Ali was born in New Delhi on the 4th of February 1949 and grew up in Kashmir. He studied in Kashmir and Delhi and later in the United States. Although his native origin is Kashmir, he is often referred to as an American poet writing in English. His 2001 work, Rooms Are Never Finished, was a finalist for the National Book Award in the year 2001. What is so unique about the collection Rooms Are Never Finished is that it talks about the grief of his mother's death and the distance that he feels from his homeland in Kashmir. In his rendition of a lyric poignant with the ideas of exile, memory, and loss, he incorporates the repetitive style of the traditional Arabic form of the ghazal. It is an elegy that talks about the feelings of homecoming and the consequences of a looming civil unrest. The influence of traditional Urdu forms, such as the ghazal, could have been a consequence of publishing a translation of the Urdu poet Faiz Ahmad Faiz's poetry in his 1991 collection, The Rebel's Silhouette. Now, let us spend some time in understanding what the prologue essentially signifies. The prologue is titled The Blessed Word and is dedicated to his friend Irfan Hassan. Apparently so. The poem that we have the great opportunity of reading was inspired by a letter sent by Irfan Hassan describing an incident in Jawahar Nagar in Srinagar, where he saw heaps of letters in a post office which triggered Shahid Ali to write A Country Without a Post Office. The prologue has the Russian poet Osip Mandelstam's poem as an epigraph which starts with "We shall meet again in Petersburg," and Shahid Ali adapts it to the scenario in Kashmir. He heavily borrows images such as the buried night sun and the blessed woman collecting the light ashes in order to say that human suffering and conflict has a power over an individual's memory of the homeland and his or her profound sense of exile. Shahid Ali's genius is his ability to be able to make a cross-cultural reference between Petersburg, Russia in the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution with that of Srinagar, India during the armed uprising in Kashmir that peaked in the year 1990. The underlying theme is that of violence, a violence that knows no boundaries, and even the blessed word becomes empty at the sight of utter chaos and destruction of life. Before reading the poem, it is imperative for you to know certain prerequisites that will help you in understanding the structure of Ali's poetry. To begin with, it is said that initially, when the poem was published in the Graham House Review, Shahid Ali titled it as Kashmir Without a Post Office instead of The Country Without a Post Office. This change in the title is important because the appeal of the poem is no longer a regional one. It is a universal one, as pointed out by Edward Said. As we know by now that the poem has been written under the backdrop of the 1990 armed uprising in Kashmir, when there was a suspension of all postal services for 7 months. In today's era of instant messaging, a suspension of postal services might not sound very disastrous for you, but we are talking about the 90s, when every information depended largely on the post, and not having a postal service meant compromising on limited or even no information about the conflict and the whereabouts of the people who are affected by it. As it turns out, some of the post offices were converted into army bunkers, a sight that inspired the poet in this poem to talk about the problem of lost letters that were left undelivered and with them went the myriad stories and experiences of the people of Kashmir. The poem is essentially about the restlessness in an individual when one has no idea about what is happening in one's own homeland. It is that feeling of exile which comes with being strained from one's own land of origin. And Shahid Ali symbolizes this feeling with the image of the locked down post office with piled up undelivered letters. If you notice closely, the poem comprises of four distinct sections with three octaves each. An octave can be defined as a stanza of 8 lines. You would find the rhyming scheme both interesting and claustrophobic. Interesting because it creates a poetic environment of A, B, C, D, D, C, B, A. You can notice how it is comprising a perfect symmetry. But it is also claustrophobic because it limits the poet's ideas to constrained structure, emphasizing the lack in the free flow of information due to lack of means to deliver important messages. As I have already mentioned, the poem is dedicated to Irfan Hassan, Shahid Ali's dearest friend, and a fellow American poet, James Merrill. The poem has an epigraph of the Victorian poet Gerard Manley Hopkins' poetry, which reads, "Letter sent to dearest that lives, alas, away." This line accentuates the emotion and the anticipation involved in sending a letter to a dear one who is far, far away. The poem upholds an imagery which is transported through recurring phrases and words that depict the longing and the desire to understand what is happening in one's own homeland during times of political turmoil. Again, I've returned to this country where a minaret has been entombed. Someone soaks the wicks of clay lamps in mustard oil, each night climbs its steps to read messages scratched on planets. His fingerprints cancel blank stamps in that archive for letters with doomed addresses, each house buried or empty. The context here is that of homecoming, where the speaker is back to his own country, and where a minaret has been entombed. A minaret is a tower-like structure of a mosque from where a muezzin calls people to come for prayer. This stanza talks about a man who soaks the wicks of clay lamps in oil and climbs the steps of the mosque each night to read messages that are scratched and carved on planets. This is the picture of an astrologer who is cancelling stamps of the letters with doomed addresses. The mention of doomed addresses can mean that many people either migrate to some other places or their homes have been burnt by the violence prevailing in Kashmir. Empty because so many fled, ran away, and became refugees there. In the plains, where they must now will a final dewfall to turn the mountains to glass. They'll see us through them, see us frantically bury houses to save them from fire that like a wall caves in. The soldiers light it, hone the flames, burn our world to sudden papier-mâché. In this stanza, there's a sudden realization of the communal conflict causing the violence that has made a section of the people to take refuge elsewhere. This could be a reference to the misfortunes of the exiled Hindus and the oppressed Muslims in the state. The beautiful Kashmir Valley has now become a place where soldiers barge in to burn everything, leaving their houses in the form of a papier machine, a fragile structure made out of paper and glue. Inlaid with gold and ash, when the Muzzin died, the city was robbed of every call. The houses were swept about like leaves for burning. Now every night we bury our houses. Theirs, the ones left empty, we are faithful. On their doors we hang wreaths, more faithful each night. Fire again is a wall, and we look for the dark as it caves in. In this stanza, we are informed that when the Muezzin died, the city was robbed of every call for prayer. There's an extended emphasis on the burying of one's own house. It is a powerful image. To bury one's own house, it could mean to wipe one's own existence by burying it, as it is already at a risk of being burnt. Shahid Ali strongly establishes the difference between they and us. It could mean the soldiers and the civilians. It could also mean the communal riots amongst the civilians based on religious lines. But this section ends on an optimistic note. There's a phrase which says, "We are faithful, and more faithful each night." It is ironic when the speaker says, "We look for the dark as it caves in," which talks about the idea that at times of political turmoil, one would wish for darkness than the light that comes out of the burns each when each other's houses are burnt. In the previous section of the poem, the section itself helps in describing the emotions evoked in the speaker when he returns to Kashmir. With the help of the images of the minarets, the astrologers, and the postal inspectors, when he talks about doomed addresses and buried houses, we cannot help but imagine the situation which demands emptiness, lack of connectivity everywhere. These images are powerful because they are decisive in establishing the eerie feeling of returning home, when home itself is left unrecognizable. Let's read the second section. We are inside the fire, looking for the dark. One card lying on the street says, "I want to be he who pours blood. To soak your hands, or I leave mine in the cold till the rain is ink, and my fingers, at the edge of pain, are seals all night to cancel the stamps." The mad guide, the lost, speak like this. They haunt a country when it is ash, phantom heart. At this point, you must be certain to understand certain standard procedures of the postal services in India or elsewhere, where cancelling of stamps mean postal markings to help prevent the reuse of the stamp once the message is delivered or at least is in the process. In this stanza, the speaker wants to come forward to do the job of cancelling the stamps and open the lines of communication. The words fire and dark are used almost as if they only come in pairs, picturing the unrest in the valley of Kashmir. And because the postal services are out of order, the speaker comes in contact with a postcard lying on the streets unaccounted. What is written on the card expresses the idea that at times like these, it is the blood which becomes an ink that tells yet another narrative of violent times. Forgive the ringtone. Pray he's alive. I have returned in rain to find him, to learn why he never wrote. I've brought cash, a currency of paisleys, to buy the new stamps, rare already, blank, no nation named on them. Without a lamp, I look for him in houses buried, empty. He may be alive, opening doors of smoke, breathing in the dark his ash refrain. In this second stanza of this part, the speaker talks about wishing to meet him. We don't know who this person is at this point of time. All we know is that the speaker is going to take any risk to find him. It could be his friend Irfan Hassan, so as to ask him why he never wrote back. But by now we know that it is because of the suspension of the postal services. He says that he brought some cash, a currency made out of paisleys, which is a droplet-shaped motif found on Kashmiri shawls, which is named after a Scottish town, Paisley. If you notice the borders of this slide, you will find those droplet-like structures which are very prominent on the shawls that come from Kashmir. Locally, it is called as boote or boota in India. He says that he brought these paisleys as currency to buy the rare stamps, rare because they are not in use. As a poet, Shahid Ali's use of cultural specific references, such as the Muzzin and the paisleys, make it prominent that he is an insider to everything that is happening in Kashmir. And the situation is such that the people of Kashmir are made to trade their culture for information. He also says that there is no name on the stamps of any nations. That is because Kashmir still is a disputed land, but India and Pakistan have laid a claim on it, and it is not independent. And the speaker is still searching for this person through ruins, but he is unable to. Everything is finished, nothing remains. I must force silence to be a mirror, to see his voice again for directions. Fire runs in waves. Should I cross that river? Each post office is boarded up. Who will deliver parchments cut in paisleys, my news to prisons? Only silence can now trace my letters to him, or in a dead office, the dark panes. This stanza starts with an effectual proclamation that everything is finished and nothing remains. And after linking fire and darkness, the speaker now links fire with silence and how the silence is the only source for direction and voice. The speaker is invoking the idea that there is so much that can be told through silence. For instance, the idea that everyone across the world are mute to the atrocities that are taking place in Kashmir, and how the silence is more violent than anything else. When there is a complete shutdown, it is silence that goes beyond and above. It is silence that speaks volumes about the voiceless who are silenced amidst the chaos. The entire map of the lost will be candled. I'm keeper of the minaret since the Muezzin died. Come soon, I'm alive. There's almost a paisley against the light, sometimes white, then black. The glutinous wash is wet on its back as it blossoms into autumn's final country. Buy it, I issue it only once at night. Come before I'm killed, my voice cancelled. Now the speaker assumes the role of the muezzin, but instead of calling people to prayer, he calls them to buy postal stamps before he too dies. The urgency with which he says, "Come soon, I'm alive," almost sounds like a cry to be heard. He reiterates the paisley, which is sometimes against the light and sometimes against the dark. This could mean the cloth itself, which has the Buddha print, which keeps guard to seal the windows and doors. The term glutinous refers to the moist back of the stamp, the idea that it is still fresh and newly put for information to be sent. It is with this urgency itself that the stanza ends when he says that the stamp is going to blossom into an autumn and urges people to come before he is killed and before his voice too is cancelled. In this stanza, the issuing of stamps is a representation of the hope that one day the people of Kashmir will finally be heard and their autonomy will be restored. But it needs to happen right away, as people are being silenced and kept under a huge threat. In this dark rain, be faithful, phantom heart. This is your pain. Feel it. You must feel it. Nothing will remain. Everything's finished. I see his voice again. This is a shrine of words. You will find your letters to me and mine to you. Come soon and tear open these vanished envelopes and reach the minaret. I'm inside the fire. I have found the dark. In this stanza, there are multiple forces at play, not only in the poem but in the mind of the speaker, whose indecisiveness of whether to be hopeful or remorseful at the given situation is made prominent with contrasting lines, such as, "In this dark rain, be faithful, phantom heart," and "This is your pain, feel it, you must feel it." By reiterating the instance where nothing will remain, everything's finished, the speaker urges people to come forward and tear open the vanished letters to find the truth of the Kashmir. He stands at the minaret, but the fire has seeped into his inside and found a dark place to hide. This image evokes the idea of how one can find solace in times of discomfort and violence. This is your pain. Feel it. You must feel it. Heart, be faithful to his mad refrain. For he soaked the wicks of clay lamps, lit them each night as he climbed these steps to read messages scratched on planets. His hands were seals to cancel the stamps. This is an archive. I found the remains of his voice, that map of longings with no limit. This poem is poignant with meanings and is an archive in itself where one must read the message like a letter that can no longer be left unaddressed because poetry can transcend boundaries. And he asks the reader to feel the pain like he does when he sees his homeland being torn apart. He harks back to the astrologer who soaks the wicks of clay lamps and lights them each night to read messages written on planets. For he is the one who is going to seal the stamps, and in him the poet finds his own, by searching the remains of the voices of those who came before him, forming a map of memory that has no limit at all. I read them, letters of lovers, the mad ones, and mine to him from whom no answers came. I like lamps, and my answers, calls to prayer to deaf worlds across continents, and my lament is cries countless. Cries like dead letters sent to this world whose end was near, always near. My words go out in huge packages of rain, go there, to addresses across the oceans. This is the fourth and the final section of the poem, which talks about how the speaker read all the letters that were piled up in which he found his letter as well, which got no answer back. He says that he sends his answers and prayers to a deaf world, which is unwilling to look at the reality that the Kashmiris are talking about. But according to the speaker, his words will not be silenced. His words, in the form of this ghazal like poem, will go out in huge packages of rain. This rain is not the dark rain that he experienced, but a rain that will usher out across the oceans in order to reach out and make prominent his experience and the experiences of the people from his homeland. It's raining as I write this. I have no prayer. It's just a shout held in. It's us, whose letters are cries that break like bodies in prison. Now each night in the minaret I guide myself up the steps, mad silhouette, I throw paisleys to clouds. The lost are like this, they bribe the air for dawn, this their dark purpose, but there's no sun there. There's no sun there. In the second stanza of this section of the poem, there's a significant shift from we to us in order to bring forth the idea that it is our letters that are being piled, which means that it is our history, our memory of homeland that is being compromised and forgotten. And these words have the power to break as they are being held as prisoners. And after all of this, he still attempts to climb the stairs to the minaret to call people to buy stamps, but now he notices his own mad silhouette, which is unrecognizable to him. He throws the paisleys to the clouds, which is a symbol of a lost heritage, of a culture left unattended. This stanza imposes images of dark prison like structures where the speaker feels like there is no dawn, no sun to give warmth, and no sense of direction. Then be pitiless, you whom I could not save. Send your cries to me, if only in this way. I found a prisoner's letters to a lover. One begins, these words may never reach you. Another ends, the skin dissolves in dew without your touch. And I want to answer. I want to live forever. What else can I say? It rains as I write this. Mad heart, be brave. So, as we come to the ending of this poem, there is a certain sense of self retrospection. He says he wants to live forever, almost as if it is the only reply he has to calm all the madness, the isolation, and the paranoia of being distanced from one's own homeland, not only in terms of distance, but in terms of its fragility. He says, mad heart, be brave, almost as if there's nothing else one could say in a situation like that. You have no other option but to be brave. You have no other direction but to look forward. You have no other means of surviving this but by surviving only. And not just you. The people who came before you survived through you, and the people who will come after you will let you live through them. That is what he probably means by living forever, where you don't let your story become some piled up letter at some nameless post office. This poem itself is a letter that maps the inner turmoil that the poet goes through when he comes back to Kashmir and sees destruction inflicted upon its beautiful landscape. And the reason this poem is often cited every time someone brings up the armed uprising in Kashmir is presumably because of its sheer ability to draw you into its suffering, to make you feel, to make you live, and to make you hear the call of its muezzin who is asking for more information about his beloved homeland. So for more information, I have linked some of these articles that are worth a read that will give you a wider perspective on how this poem can be connected to recent events that have taken place in the past few decades, and also in the current situation, not only in Kashmir but on a global scenario. So please go forward and go further and read much more about this topic, and I hope you liked it, as I always end my lecture by asking each and every student of mine whether they really like the poem or not. I had a lot of fun recording it, and I hope this is informative. Thank you very much. See you next time. Not to sound like a pretentious beginner YouTuber, but please do subscribe for more information.